back on the YouTube channel where I exclusively answer your questions about the show, about myself, about all kinds of topics. Basically, whatever you want to talk about is what we do on this channel. So let's get right to the questions. There's a theme to this week's. We don't have a ton of younger listeners, younger being 18 to 24-year-olds. But we do have a few, and we have a few who are in their early stages of their career. And so they tend to be more engaged, frankly, in terms of sending feedback, leaving comments, engaging on our videos, engaging on our podcast channel. So I want to take a couple of questions from our younger listeners and do my best to answer them, but also offer them up to my wider audience of people who are more experienced, who are in their senior executive years, who are in their mid-career years. You all may have better answers for these questions than I do, and I'd love to crowdsource some of those as well. So I'm going to get these questions up. I'm going to give my answers, but to all my listeners who are a little older in their careers, rest assured that these young folks would love to hear from you too. So here's the first one from Sophie in Wellington, New Zealand. Sophie asks, Brian, as a university student just starting to follow global politics, what daily habits or routines would you recommend to build a balanced, informed worldview without getting overwhelmed? So I take for granted that I've been following international affairs for a good part of my life, even before I fully understood the context of it. And I would say because I grew up in a household where the news was just on a lot, and certainly my mother was a very, very interested in international affairs and global politics and news. And my teachers inspired that in me. I've really been following this stuff since I was a teenager, and I had great guides to determine the difference between, mainstream news. At the time, newspapers were a big source of that. Opinion pages, the distinction between the two, hard news versus opinion. And then I grew up in an era in the United States where opinion and entertainment television started to take over. And so there was a glut of information. I try to think about what it would be like if I was a young person in 2025, if I was, in my college years. The amount of information that young people have access to today and the inundation of that information is incredible. And I think, Sophie, you're asking the exact right question about not getting overwhelmed. But I will say this, if you really want to get a balanced view of the world, whether it's your corner of the world or the world as a whole, at your age, I would encourage you to take in as much information as you possibly can from as many sources as you can get it for as much as your brain can take. And only when you've had enough and you just need to shut off the phone or shut off the computer. If you start feeling truly overwhelmed, then I would advise you to step back from it, take a break, take a breather. But your tolerance level is going to be a lot higher than people who might be years older than you and have been inundated with too much over too much of their life. It's just like anything else. When you're young, you can do things to greater extremes than you can when you're older. And I think being young, it's all about exposing yourself to as many points of view as possible so that you have a big, wide, broad breadth of reference points, and you can begin to find out where you are on that spectrum. The one piece of advice that I would give you when it comes to following global affairs is I want you at your age to try in every circumstance where there's a major geopolitical clash to really, if you have the time, dive deep into both sides of the history of that conflict and try to keep an open mind that rarely is there an obvious right and an obvious wrong. Rarely is there a circumstance where there's only one true way to think about a topic or an issue. If you can train your brain in geopolitics to get out of the good guy versus bad guy paradigm, if you can get yourself out of the traditional media narrative of heroes and villains, if you can truly look at it from a human perspective and think about the human experiences of the people involved, whether it's a conflict or whether it's even something like global trade or global travel or immigration, if you can put a human lens on it and avoid the hero-villain dichotomy, you're going to get a lot more out of the news, and you're going to start being able to develop reference points for yourself. But understand that that's hard. The vast majority of people, they internalize the news and they want to put the hero-villain framework on everything. They want heroes and villains to cheer for and boo against, and they want simplicity and black and white in stories, and very rarely is anything in international affairs or global politics as clear-cut as that. Sometimes, but for the most part, it's full of nuance, it's full of complications, and because people are involved, you're going to have a lot of different perspectives that are valuable and worth listening to. So if you really want to be informed, there's no way but to allow yourself to be overwashed with all the available headlines from many, many, many resources. You live in New Zealand, so I think you have the benefit of a truly global perspective. Because if you live in the U.S., if you live in Western Europe, if you live in places like India or certain parts of the Middle East, there's a lot of built-in bias to a lot of the media that's out there. I don't think New Zealand has as much of that. And so I also think New Zealanders, from everything I've ever learned about the Kiwis, they have a natural curiosity about the world and their place in it. So I think you've got more news sources at your fingertips that are already thinking the way that I just suggested. So lean into that. But internationally, be open-minded, absorb everything you can from everywhere you can, and let it wash over you. But also just it's about keeping the right mindset. And that's the most important thing to getting a balanced view, is avoiding the traps of simple thinking. All right, so my next question comes from Daniel in Dublin, Ireland, a city full of young people. Great college there, great universities really throughout the country, but in Dublin in particular. Daniel asks, in an era of misinformation, how can young people like me learn to question sources and spot bias without becoming cynical or dismissive of all news? Well, that's an insightful question, Daniel. The very fact that you're asking it means you've already identified a risk area, and the fact that you've identified it means you'll probably avoid it. But for others out there who are becoming distrustful of pretty much any source of information, I don't think this is a bad thing. I would argue that one of the best things that has happened in the last decade has been a recognition that there's almost no such thing as a source of information that's completely unbiased and doesn't have a point of view. And it's important to acknowledge that point of view and share that with your audience so that they understand the framework within which you are presenting them a story. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with that. So, for instance, on this show, I try to do the best I can to share with people that I don't have a political perspective that I am engendering into this program. I don't take a position of right or wrong. I take a position of a curious person who wants to learn more and wants to share what I learned with others. That's my bias, is to uncover the questions that nobody else has bothered to ask or thought to ask, and to reveal deeper truths that then allow us all to refine our thinking. But that very refinement may end up being a more left-wing, a more centrist, a more right-wing. But as long as it's refining thinking, no matter where you land, I'm not partial one way or the other. But I think the way that you can avoid cynicism and dismissiveness is to just look for the sources that are straightforward with you about their perspective. Now, that having been said, once you know what the perspective is, it's important that you question it from the other side. And don't simply take whatever is given to you as the factual 100% absolute truth. Take it understanding whose perspective that the information came from, and question whether or not there's a reason why they may bias one piece of that information or the other. The best way for you to spot bias, in my view, is if you get information presented to you as absolute truth, absolute fact, and you know that there's no way to definitively prove that point of view. Let me give you a practical example. This happens in economic conversations all of the time. If you get a source from whatever background that tells you definitively that they know exactly what is going to happen and exactly the time frame in which it's going to happen as a result of a specific policy, that's biased. Because the truth is, there are many theories. There's a lot of evidence behind different points of view. But even if somebody gets the basic outlines of economic realities correct, timing is what matters. Anybody can go out there and tell you the market's going to crash. And if they tell you the same thing for 20 years, well, eventually they'll be right. But if they can't tell you within some reasonable time period based on historical evidence and fact, then they're just sort of wishful thinking. I'll give you maybe a better example in something that can be provable. There are plenty of stories in science, especially around issues like climate change, where you can cite clear, measurable data that draws logical conclusions. But when you start getting into projections 40 years down the road, and you hear somebody trying to definitively tell you that they know exactly what's going to happen in that time period, when we can't even get the next couple of days right on issues of basic weather, or we can't get the next 4 or 5 years, or we haven't gotten the last 5 years right, you know you're getting something from a biased position. So to directly answer it, Daniel, in an era of misinformation, I would argue that there's always been misinformation. This isn't a new era. People have always been trying to deceive and manipulate. None of this is new. And young people are inundated with more of it than ever before. That's true because you have access to so much information at your fingertips. But the only thing you can really do to question a bias is to look for authoritative voices who are trying to tell you things are factually true that can't be objectively measured. That is the easiest way to find a bias. And the best way to avoid cynicism and total dismissiveness, I would say it's hard, but just stay engaged. As I say on my show every episode, stay curious. If you keep a curious and open mind and you ask genuine questions with a desire to learn, and you keep an open mind that things that you believed to be true may not be true, it will help you avoid that cynicism. The other thing I'll say too is when you're listening to sources of information, listen whether or not those sources are trying to build towards a better world. If their desire, if their goal is the betterment of an individual group of people or a country or solving, a major global crisis, because while they could be misguided in their solutions, at least their heart's in the right place. But if you get a source of information that all they ever do is say that they want to oppose somebody else and tear down somebody else, and they can never tell you who they're fighting for, that's something that is a good filter. And the reason we get so cynical of some groups is because all they want to do is destroy. And that's not really where most of us are. So these are my thoughts. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Daniel, for your questions. I hope this was helpful. For all the young people out there listening, my overall advice to you when it comes to geopolitics and public affairs and being engaged in the political process, just keep an open mind. Stay curious, ask questions, assume that most people are in it for the right reasons, assume that positive intent, that even if somebody you don't fully understand why they're saying what they're saying, why they're doing what they're doing, keep an open mind. And above all, try to allow yourself as a young person to have as many experiences as possible. The best way for you to figure out where you are on the intellectual or the political or the economic scale, the best way for you to figure out what you believe is to listen to what everybody else believes. And I want you to go out and get as many varied views as you possibly can while you're young enough to absorb it, find it, internalize it, think about it, debate it, chew on it, and just try to avoid the temptation. If you're in your college years, even if you're in a master's program, you're in your early 20s, try to avoid the temptation of thinking that you've solved everything and that you've cracked the code and that you're going to be an ideologue for life because you think you know it. It's very easy to slip into ideas that are very attractive at one age that may not be as appealing to you at a different age. And it's very attractive to listen to simple black and white answers when your mind is trying to deal with complex issues. Allow yourself the time and space to continue to learn and to challenge yourself, even when you start feeling like there's one point of view or another that's really appealing to you. What's great about being young is you have time on your side and you have time to be proven wrong, but you also have time to adapt your views as you grow and as you learn, as you have different experiences, and you have the energy to go and have all those experiences and the freedom to do it. Use it. Make it an ally of yours. And I would also warn any young person anywhere in the world, it could be tempting to approach these issues based on your background. If your family held a certain point of view, very often you either adopt it or you completely go against it. Try to be mindful of what your family has set you up to believe, and don't follow your instincts to either immediately accept it because it worked for them or immediately reject it because you're just a rebellious character. Just kind of let it sit in the back of your mind, take it into consideration, but don't elevate or bury your parents' points of view simply because they're your parents' points of view. All right, I've tried to dole out as much advice as I can. I don't know that I'm in the best position to do so. There are people who listen to this show much older, more experienced than I am, and I'd love to hear from you. If you've got better answers for Sophie or Daniel, feel free to leave them in the comments of this video or send me a follow-up, info at brianjmatos.com, because I'd love to read them on air. All right, thanks again to everybody for sending in your questions. Keep them coming. I'll be back on the YouTube channel next week with another set of questions and answers, and I hope to talk to you all again real soon. Thanks.